The Galactic Concordance Academy floated in the darkness of space, like a jewel made of metal and light, orbiting a neutron star that pulsed with deadly radiation every 3 seconds inside. The massive station had housed over 10,000 students from 200 different species. Kira-chun sat alone in the back of her quantum mechanics class and tried to focus on the holographic equations dancing in the air before her. She had been at the academy for 6 months now and still felt like an outsider looking in through foggy glass. The other students moved with easy confidence through the corridors and classrooms while she struggled with the thin atmosphere that left her constantly tired and the low gravity that made her feel like she might float away at any moment. Professor Zalthath, a crystalline being whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns, gestured with 3 of his 7 limbs and a particularly complex probability matrix. "As you can clearly perceive," he said in the melodious clicking language that the translation implants converted to understanding, "the wave function collapses at the moment of observation, according to the quantum observer principle." Kira wrote down notes by hand in an old-fashioned paper notebook because the neural interface systems gave her splitting headaches around her. Students with crystalline neural structures or quantum-enabled brain lobes absorb the information as easily as breathing. She was trying to work through the problem using linear mathematics when she noticed 3 students standing beside her desk. They were Zethkal, a predatory species with sleek, black carapaces that gleamed under the classroom lights and 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. The leader was Riktar, whose family crest marked him as the son of a concordant senator. "The human is writing with primitive tools again," Riktar said loudly enough that half the class turned to look. "Perhaps her species hasn't evolved beyond scratching in the dirt." Laughter rippled through the nearby student. Kira kept her eyes on her notebook and said nothing. She had learned that responding only made things worse. Professor Zalthath either didn't notice or chose not to intervene. Continuing his lecture without pause after class, Kira gathered her materials and headed for the Dying Commons. Food there was nutritionally balanced for hundreds of species, but tasted like cardboard mixed with chemicals. To her, she suspected some of it was mildly toxic to her biology because she often felt nauseous after eating. But complaining would only mark her as weak. She selected items that seemed least likely to make her sick and found an empty table near the observation windows that looked out at the swirling accretion disk of the neutron star. "Is this seat taken?" asked a voice. Akira looked up to see Mayara, a Quilthian whose fur shifted colors with her emotions. Right now it showed pale blue, which meant friendliness tinged with caution. "Go ahead." Kira said. Mayara sat down but kept glancing around nervously. "You should be more careful," she said quietly. "Riktar has been talking about you." "What's he saying?" Kira asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "He says you're a charity case from a primitive world, that your species only got into the concordance because the council felt sorry for you." Mayara's fur flickered orange with distress. "He says someone needs to teach you your place." Kira forced herself to take another bite of the tasteless protein bar. "Thanks for the warning." That night in her tiny dormitory room, Kira pulled up information about Earth on her personal terminal. The official concordance database listed it as a newly contacted world in Sector 842, inhabited by a bipedal species that had only recently achieved faster-than-light communication. There was a planetary classification code, but Kira had never bothered to look up what it meant. She was too tired most of the time and too focused on just surviving each day. The next morning brought the weekly survival simulation, a virtual reality exercise where students had to navigate hostile environments using only basic equipment. Kira strapped into the simulation pod with a sense of dread. These exercises always left her feeling inadequate because the other students seemed to glide through challenges that exhausted her. The simulation loaded, and she found herself standing on a rocky plain under a dim Red sun environmental readout showed 1.2 gravities and a temperature range that swung from freezing to scorching. Begin, announced the AI administrator. Kia started walking. The gravity felt heavy but not unbearable, almost like wearing a weighted backpack during a hike. She had done plenty of hiking back on Earth in the mountains near her home. The thin atmosphere made breathing harder, but she adjusted her pace and focused on steady movement. Other students flickered past her in the simulation as they raced to complete the objective and plant a beacon on a distant peak. Through her pod's audio feed, she could hear them struggling and complaining about the brutal conditions. Wrecker's voice came through particularly loud as he demanded to know why the gravity was set so high. Kira tuned them out and kept walking. She found a rhythm that worked for her body and maintained it hour after hour. When the temperature dropped, she used thermal reflective materials from her basic kit to conserve heat. When it rose, she found shade and moved during the cooler periods. She rationed her water carefully and supplemented it with moisture extracted from the local plant life, using a technique she had learned during survival training back home. 12 hours into the 24-hour simulation, Kira planted her beacon on the summit and returned to the starting point. She was the third student to complete the exercise. Rector finished 2 hours later, his avatar stumbling and clearly exhausted. His cronies took even longer in the debriefing room after everyone had disconnected from the simulation. Professor Catherine displayed the performance metrics on a large screen. Cadet Chun, the professor said in her whistling voice, you maintained the most efficient energy expenditure rate and showed excellent adaptation to the environmental variables. Kira nodded, too tired to feel pleased around her. Students whispered and stared. Vector's expression darkened until his carapace seemed to absorb all light. That evening, Kira returned to her room to find her research project destroyed. The biological samples she had been cultivating for her xenobiology class were dumped across her desk and floor. 3 weeks of work ruined. Her notebooks had been torn apart and scattered on her wall. Someone had spray-painted a crude symbol in Zethkal script that her translator identified as a slur meaning preamble. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, then quietly began cleaning up the mess. She reported the incident to campus security, but the Zethkal officer who took her statement seemed bored and uninterested. These things happen in dormitories, he said. Pranks between students. This wasn't a prank. Kira said, someone destroyed my academic work. Can you prove who did it? The officer asked when Kira admitted she couldn't. He closed the report with a dismissive gesture. Perhaps you should be more careful about making enemies. Kira walked back to her room through corridors that suddenly felt more hostile than ever. She didn't know it yet, but she had just experienced the first strike in a campaign that would change everything, not just for her, but for every human who would come after her to the stars. And the people who had marked her as prey were about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between weakness and restraint. The harassment continued for 3 more weeks and escalated with each passing. Dakara's food was contaminated with substances that should have made her violently ill, but her iron-rich human digestive system processed them without major problems. Her schedule was hacked, so she showed up to the wrong classrooms at the wrong times. Anonymous messages flooded her personal terminal, calling her names in dozens of languages. Through it all, Kira kept her head down and continued her studies. She had survived worse than bullies back on Earth, though she never spoke about those times to anyone here. The Academy administration did nothing despite her repeated reports. Professor Zaltoth told her that she needed to develop thicker skin, and that conflict between students was a natural part of the learning environment. What finally brought things to a head was the incident on Observation Deck 7. Kira had gone there during her free period to watch the neutron star and work on recalculating her ruined research project from memory. Deck was usually empty during this time, which made it a good place to think. She was so focused on her calculations that she didn't hear them approach until Vriktar's voice cut through her concentration. "Look what we found," he said. The prey animal all alone. Kira turned to find herself surrounded by 5 Zethkal students, including Vriktar. They had positioned themselves between her and the only exit. "I don't want any trouble," she said calmly and began gathering her materials. "That's good," Vriktar said, moving closer, "because you're going to learn your place in the natural order, and it won't be any trouble at all." He reached out with one clawed hand to grab her shoulder, intending to shove her against the wall. What happened next? Took less than 2 seconds. Kira's hand moved in a blur and caught Vriktar's arm at the joint. She twisted her whole body using leverage and momentum rather than strength. And there was a sharp cracking sound as his primary arm broke in 3 places. Richter screamed and collapsed to the floor. His friends stood frozen in shock. Kiera looked at each of them in turn with an expression that was completely calm and utterly cold. "Don't follow me," she said quietly. Then she walked past them and out of the observation deck, leaving Vriktar writhing on the floor. Within an hour, campus security had escorted Kira to an interrogation room where she sat across from Dean Sorthax, a massive being whose species resembled an octopus mixed with a spider. "You broke another student's arm," the dean said. "He tried to assault me," Kira replied. "I defended myself. 4 witnesses say you attacked without provocation. 4 of his friends." "You mean," Kira said. "Check the security footage." The dean's multiple eyes narrowed, but he pulled up the video feed from the observation deck. They watched in silence as the recording clearly showed Vriktar approaching aggressively and Kira responding only after he reached for her. "This is still highly concerning," Dean Sorthax said. "The amount of force you used was excessive." "I used exactly enough force to stop the threat," Kira said. "If I had wanted to use excessive force, he wouldn't be in the medical bay right now." Something in her tone made the dean pause for the first time since Kira had arrived at the academy. An administrator actually pulled up her complete file, including the planetary data. What he saw made his skin change to a pale shade that indicated shock. "You're from a Class 12 Deathworld," he said slowly. "I'm from Earth," Kira replied. "Is there a difference?" The dean didn't answer. He was too busy reading through the environmental data with growing horror. 1. Full gravity of crushing force, an atmosphere containing 21% oxygen, a gas so corrosive that most species used it for industrial purposes. Weather systems that regularly produce storms with winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Native predators that included pack-hunting persistence hunters who could track prey for days without stopping, and the native intelligent species. Humans themselves, who had evolved as apex predators on a world that was actively trying to kill them every single day. Why weren't we informed of this? Dean Sorthax demanded. "It's in my file." Kira said, "You just never looked." The news spread through the academy faster than light-speed communication. Students who had ignored or mocked Kira-chan now pulled up everything they could find about Earth and its environment. What they discovered terrified them. Humans could survive in temperatures that would freeze or cook most species. They could endure acceleration forces that would pulp internal organs. They had evolved to eat things that were literally poisonous because their homeworld was so competitive that even the plants had developed chemical warfare. Their healing capabilities bordered on the miraculous, able to recover from injuries that would be fatal to other species, and perhaps most frightening of all, they were endurance specialists who could keep going long after other creatures collapsed from exhaustion. Professor Mesho, who taught xenobiology, called an emergency seminar to discuss the implications. Class 12 Deathworlds are extraordinarily rare, she explained to a packed lecture hall. Only 4 known inhabited planets rank this high in environmental hostility. Species that evolve on such worlds develop extreme adaptations for survival. She displayed an image of Earth with its continents and oceans. This planet experiences regular catastrophic events, including volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, ice ages, and meteor impacts. The human species evolved to survive all of this. A student in the front row raised a tentacle, but Cadet Chun seemed so weak. They said, "She's always tired and struggling with our coursework, because we've been slowly poisoning her." Professor Meisho said bluntly, "Our standard atmospheric mix contains insufficient oxygen for human metabolism. The 0.8 gravity we consider challenging is actually less than what her body requires to function optimally, and the environmental controls we use to maintain comfortable conditions are leaving her in a constant state of physiological stress." She pulled up Kira's medical scans. Despite this, her body has been adapting. She's developed increased lung capacity to extract more oxygen from our thin air. Her bone density has actually increased rather than decreased in low gravity, which should be impossible. And she's been operating at what for her species is about 60% of normal efficiency. The lecture hall went silent as the implications sank in. "Are you saying," another student asked slowly, "that we've been watching a Deathworld predator function at reduced capacity, and we still thought she was just like us?" "Exactly." Professor Meisho said the Academy's Administrative Council held an emergency meeting. That night, they reviewed every interaction Kira had experienced since her arrival, and realized with mounting horror that they had completely failed in their duty of care. Worse, they had allowed a senator's son to repeatedly assault and harass a student from a species that could literally tear him apart without effort. The political implications were staggering. If Earth's government learned that their citizens were being abused at concordance institutions, the newly established diplomatic relations could collapse. Dean Sarthax issued immediate orders that Kira's environmental needs be properly accommodated. Her quarters were adjusted to full Earth gravity and proper atmospheric composition. The medical staff began treating her for chronic hypoxia and malnutrition, but the damage was already done. Ruktar, humiliated by his broken arm and furious at becoming a laughingstock, refused to accept what had happened. His pride demanded revenge, and his family's political connections meant he had the resources to pursue it, while the Academy scrambled to make amends. Ruktar was already planning his next move. Would make the human pay for embarrassing him. He would prove that Deathworld or not. She was still just prey. It was a decision that would cost him everything and teach the galaxy a lesson they would never forget. Ruktar's father arrived at the Academy 3 days after the observation. Deck incident. Senator Kethver was a powerful figure in the Concordance, whose family had held positions of authority for 12 generations. Swept into Dean Sarthax's office with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. "My son was brutally attacked by a savage from an uncontacted world," the senator declared. "I demand this human be expelled and deported immediately." Dean Sarthax had prepared for this confrontation. He displayed the security footage showing Ruktar initiating the assault. "Your son attacked Cadet Chen without provocation," the dean said. "She responded with appropriate defensive force." Appropriate? Senator Kethver's carapace darkened with rage. "She broke his arm in 3 places. She could have broken his neck just as easily," the dean replied. The human showed remarkable restraint, given that she's from a Class 12. Deathworld and her species evolved as apex predators. The senator paused at that. He had not known about Earth's classification when he reviewed the data. His expression shifted from outrage to calculation. A direct confrontation could backfire politically if it became known that his son had bullied a student from a Deathworld species. But he couldn't allow the insult to his family honor to stand unanswered. "We will resolve this matter," Senator Kethver said coldly, "one way or another." 2 weeks later, the Academy announced a mandatory field expedition to Krethla 4, A moon known for its challenging but educational environment. All third-year students would participate in a survival exercise designed to test their practical application of skills learned in the classroom. Kira felt uneasy about the expedition, but couldn't articulate why. Her new quarters with proper gravity and atmosphere had helped her recover much of her strength. She had gained back the weight she'd lost, and her chronic headaches had disappeared. Professor Maisho had taken her aside and apologized personally for not recognizing her needs earlier, and several faculty members now went out of their way to ensure she had appropriate accommodations. But she still felt like an outsider, and the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room told her that many students were afraid of her. Now the expedition began smoothly enough. 200 students were transported to Krethla, 4 in groups of 20, and given basic survival kits, the 4 being dropped at various locations across the moon's surface. The goal was to trek to a central meeting point 200 kilometers away using only natural navigation and basic tools. Kira's group included Riktar and 4 of his friends. She requested a transfer to a different group, but was told that the assignments were final, and that she needed to learn to work with all types of beings if she wanted to succeed in the concordance. The first day went well. The environment was actually easier for Kira than the Academy Station because the gravity was 0.6 standard, and the atmosphere contained more oxygen. She felt stronger and more alert than she had in months. That night, while Kira slept in her individual shelter, Riktar made his movie, disabled her emergency beacon and communication device, then scattered her supplies into the surrounding wilderness. His friends created false telemetry data showing that Kira had wandered away from camp during a minor dust storm. When morning came and Kira was reported missing, the expedition leaders initiated search and rescue protocols. They assumed she had become disoriented and lost, probably injured somewhere in the rocky terrain. No one suspected sabotage because Rektar had been careful to cover his tracks. What they didn't know was that Kira had woken during the sabotage and realized immediately what was happening. She had pretended to sleep while Rektar destroyed her equipment because confronting him in the dark, surrounded by his allies, would be stupid. Instead, she waited until they returned to their shelters and then calmly assessed her situation. No communication gear meant no way to call for help. No emergency beacon meant the search teams would have a hard time finding her. Limited supplies meant she needed to find food and water on her own. For anyone else, this would have been a death sentence. For Kira-chan, who had grown up camping in the Rocky Mountains and had completed a wilderness survival course before coming to the academy, it was just an inconvenience. She spent the first hour after dawn gathering materials from the local environment. The moon's plant life was similar enough to Earth vegetation that she could identify edible species using basic principles. She fashioned a water container from broad leaves sealed with tree sap and collected dew from the early morning using rocks and plant fibers. She constructed basic tools, including a knife and a walking staff. Then, she checked her position using the stars visible even during daylight and began walking toward the rendezvous point. Search and rescue teams deployed with emergency medical supplies and tracking equipment. They flew grid patterns over the wilderness calling for Kira through loudspeakers and scanning for heat signatures. Professor Catherine led the effort, personally feeling guilty that she hadn't protected her student better. How long can a human survive in this environment? She asked the medical specialist on her team. Based on our data, perhaps 3 or 4 days without water. The specialist replied, the temperature swings will cause hypothermia at night, even with shelter. What they didn't account for was that temperature swings from -10 to +40 degrees Celsius were mild compared to Earth's extremes, or that a human could go weeks without food if necessary, or that Kira had spent summers working as a wilderness guide for younger students back home. On the second day, Kira encountered one of the moon's native predators. It was roughly the size of a large dog with 6 legs and a ridge of spines along its back. The creature approached her cautiously. Drawn by curiosity rather than hunger, Kira stood still and let it sniff her while making soft clicking sounds. She had learned long ago that most predators could distinguish between prey behavior and confident neutrality. The creature circled her twice, then sat down and watched her with intelligent eyes. Kira shared a piece of the dried plant matter she had prepared, and the creature accepted it delicately by nightfall of the second day. The predator was following her at a distance of about 10 meters on the third day. Rescue teams spotted Kira walking steadily toward the rendezvous point. She was not stumbling or injured or showing signs of distress. She was moving with the easy confidence of someone on a pleasant hike. Behind her, the 6-legged predator followed like a loyal pet. The rescue shuttle landed ahead of her, and Professor Catherine rushed out with a medical team. "Cadet Chun, are you injured?" she called. "I'm fine," Kira replied. "Just ready to get back to campus." "What happened to your equipment?" "Someone sabotaged it," Kira said calmly. "I can show you the evidence." Professor Catherine stared at the young human who looked healthier and more vital than she had ever seen. Her Kira had actually gained weight during her 3 days in the wilderness. Her skin had more color and her eyes were brighter. "What is that creature behind you?" the professor asked. "Oh, I think it's like a wolf," Kira said. "We have similar animals on Earth. It just started following me, and I didn't see any reason to chase it away." The medical team scanned Kira and found her in excellent health. The predator allowed itself to be scanned as well, showing no signs of aggression despite being surrounded by strange beings. Back at the base camp, investigators examined Kira's destroyed equipment and the false telemetry data. The trail led directly to Vriktar, whose clumsy attempts at covering his digital tracks were obvious to anyone with proper forensic tools. Senator Kethfer was summoned again, but this time he arrived to find his son facing criminal charges that could result in expulsion and possible imprisonment. The senator tried to use his influence, but Dean Sarthax had already reported the incident to the Concordance Security Council. The political shields that had protected Vriktar before were gone in desperation and rage. Senator Kethfer made a choice that would destroy his family, contacted off-world mercenaries, and arranged for a permanent solution to his son's humiliation. Hired killers to eliminate Kira Chun and make it look like an accident. It was a decision born of pride and hatred and complete ignorance of what humans were actually capable of when survival was on the line. The galaxy was about to get a very harsh lesson about why you should never corner a predator from a Deathworld. The Cultural Integration Festival was meant to be a celebration of the diverse species that made up the Galactic Concordance Academy. Students displayed art, music, food, and traditions from their homeworlds in the station's main plaza. Kira had set up a small booth showing photographs of Earth's landscapes because she lacked the artistic talents to create anything more elaborate. She had images of mountains and oceans, forests and deserts, cities and wilderness. Other students stopped by occasionally to stare at the landscapes with a mixture of awe and horror. "Your world has water that falls from the sky," one student said. "That must be terrifying. We call it rain." Kira explained, "It's actually quite peaceful." She was adjusting a display of images from Yellowstone National Park when her threat assessment instincts suddenly screamed a warning. Those instincts have been honed by millions of years of evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of humans surviving in hostile environments. Kira trusted them absolutely. She turned casually, as if checking something behind her booth, and spotted 3 figures moving through the crowd. With purposeful intent, they were trying to look casual, but their body language was all wrong. They were hunting. Kira recognized all 3 species from her xenobiology classes at Kreth Warrior. Cast member with 4 arms and natural armor, plating a Silveran assassin whose flexible body could squeeze through impossibly small spaces, and a Thorian tracker whose sensory organs could detect prey by electromagnetic fields. These were not students, and they were coming for her. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they closed the distance. Akira smiled politely at the student she had been talking to and said, "Excuse me for a moment." Then she moved. She didn't run toward the main plaza where crowds of students would be in the crossfire. Instead, she headed for the maintenance corridors that she had memorized during her months at the academy. The assassins followed. They expected her to panic or try to find help. Instead, she led them into a maze of passages where numbers would matter less than knowledge of the terrain. Thorian Tracker reached her first because his species was built for speed. He came around the corner with a blade extended, expecting to find easy prey. What he found was Kira-chan holding a length of pipe she had torn from the wall. She swung it like a baseball bat and connected with his sensory organ cluster with a wet crunch. The Thorian went down screaming. Kira didn't stop to finish him. She kept moving deeper into the maintenance section, where the lighting was poor and the corridors were narrow. The Kreth warrior came next, moving carefully because he had heard his partners scream. Kira was waiting in a section where pipes ran along the ceiling at head height for most species. When the warrior ducked under the pipes, she dropped from where she had climbed above them. Her weight combined with gravity drove him to the floor. She had studied Kreth anatomy in class and knew their armor had a weak point at the neck joint. Her improvised blade found that gap and the warrior stopped moving. 2 down, 1 to go. Silveran Assassin was the most dangerous because her species was renowned for patience and stealth. Kira knew she couldn't outrun or outfight the assassin in open combat, but she didn't need to. She needed to change the rules of engagement. There was a section of corridor ahead where a coolant line ran through the wall. Kira used her pipe to rupture the line, and freezing liquid sprayed into the passage, creating a cloud of vapor. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds for the Silveran, who was cold-blooded. This was catastrophic. Her movement slowed as her body temperature plummeted. Kira came out of the vapor cloud like a ghost and struck twice with brutal efficiency. Then it was over. 3 professional killers lay in the maintenance corridor, disabled or dead. Kira stood among them, breathing hard and covered in multiple colors of alien blood. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She found a first aid kit on the wall and treated the cuts and burns she had sustained during the fight. Her ribs hurt where the Kreth had landed a blow, and she thought one might be cracked, but she was alive. She had survived. She always survived. Security found her 15 minutes later sitting on an unconscious Silveran and calmly applying antiseptic to a gash on her arm. The security chief, a grizzled veteran named Corval who had served in 3 wars, looked at the scene and felt his blood run cold. "What happened here?" he asked. 3 people tried to kill me," Kira replied. "I stopped them." The security footage told the full story. Within hours it had been leaked to the station's internal network, and from there it spread to the wider concordance. Millions of beings across hundreds of worlds watched alone. Human students systematically dismantled 3 professional killers using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical thinking. They watched her use the environment with terrifying efficiency. They watched her target vulnerable points with surgical precision. They watched her fight not with honor or elegance, but with the pure savage determination to survive no matter what. The footage became iconic news. Services across the galaxy picked it up. Anthropologists and military strategists analyzed every second. The image of Kira-chan sitting calmly on a defeated assassin while treating her own wounds became a symbol that would define human-alien relations for years to come. The investigation into who hired the assassins took less than a day. Financial records showed payments from accounts linked to Senator Kethver communication. Intercepts revealed his instructions to make the death look accidental. The senator was arrested along with his son, Riktar, who had known about the plan. The Zefkal government formally apologized to Earth and stripped the Kethver family of all titles and property, but there was still the matter of the blood debt in Zefkal culture. When one family member causes grievous harm to another being, the debt can only be settled through personal combat or formal acknowledgement of submission. Senator Kethver's clan elders, trying to salvage something from the disaster, invoked this. Ancient Lawrector would face Kira-chan in single combat if she refused. It would be seen as cowardice and create political complications between Earth and the Zethkal homeworld if she accepted. They expected her to die honorably, and the matter would be settled. They had forgotten what world she came from. The challenge was formally delivered to Kira in her quarters, where she was recovering from her injuries. Dean Surthax delivered it personally with obvious reluctance. "You don't have to accept this," he said. "We can find another way to resolve the political issues." Kira read the formal challenge document and thought about everything that had happened since she arrived at the Academy: the harassment and sabotage, the assassination attempt. Endless assumption that she was weak and prey. She thought about every human who would come after her to the stars. What message would her choice send to them? What message would it send to the species who thought humans could be pushed around? "I accept," she said, "but I have terms." Dean Surthax felt a chill run through his entire body. "What terms?" "The duel will be fought under Earth standard conditions," Kira said. 1 gravity of acceleration and 21% oxygen atmosphere. No weapons. Except natural ones. No armor. Just me and him and the environment my species evolved in. The Dean understood immediately what she was proposing. That would put him at a severe disadvantage. Yes. Kira said simply, it would. The Zethkal clan elders accepted the terms because they didn't understand what they meant. They thought their natural weapons of claws and venom would be enough. They thought Riktar's warrior training would overcome any environmental difficulties. They were about to learn why you should never fight a predator in its natural habitat. Duel was scheduled for 1 week later, and the entire galaxy would be watching. The arena was constructed in one of the station's largest cargo bays and modified to create an Earth-standard environment, 1 full gravity pressing down with crushing force, 21% oxygen flowing through the air like industrial solvent temperature, and humidity levels that most species would find uncomfortable at best. Seats for observers were installed in a viewing gallery that was sealed and maintained at standard concordance atmospheric conditions. Every major news service in the galaxy had sent representatives. Diplomats from dozens worlds attended, including a delegation from Earth, who had arrived just hours before the human ambassador was a stern woman named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who had requested a private meeting with Kira before the duel. "You don't have to do this," Ambassador Okonkwo said as they sat in Kira's quarters. "The diplomatic situation can be managed." "With respect, Ambassador, that's not why I'm doing it," Kira replied. She looked healthier than she had in months, thanks to the proper environmental controls in her new quarters. "Then why?" the ambassador asked. "Because I'm not the last human who will come here," Kira said. "Others will follow, and they need to know that we don't have to accept being treated as less than. That we're not weak just because we're new to the concordance." Ambassador Okonkwo studied the young woman who had somehow become the face of humanity to the wider galaxy. "You understand that if you seriously injure or kill him, there will be consequences." "I understand," Kira said, "but he tried to kill me first, and I'm still standing. That should mean something." The viewing gallery filled with spectators. An hour before the scheduled duel, students from the academy mixed with government officials and military observers. Professor Meisho sat with other faculty members and felt her stomach twist with anxiety. Beside her, Professor Catherine's feathers were ruffled with agitation. "This is barbaric," Catherine whispered. "We should have found another way." The Zethkal demanded blood debt. Meisho replied, "At least this way it's controlled." In the Zethkal section of the gallery, clan elders watched with grim satisfaction. They believed Riktar would restore family honor through victory He had trained since childhood in combat arts. He possessed natural weapons that could slice through metal, and he had the fury of humiliation driving him. How could a soft human possibly stand against him? They were about to find out. Kira entered the arena first through a pressure-sealed door that hissed as it equalized. She wore simple athletic clothing that allowed free movement and nothing else, no armor or weapons or protective gear of any kind. She walked to the center of the arena and stood, calmly breathing in the oxygen-rich air that felt like home. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt completely comfortable in her environment. The gravity pulled at her with familiar weight. The air filled her lungs properly. Her body responded with the full efficiency it had evolved for. She was no longer operating at 60% capacity. She was a Levriktar entered from the opposite side and immediately staggered. Double gravity hit him like a hammer, and he went down on one knee. His carapace made labored clicking sounds as it adjusted to the crushing pressure. He tried to breathe and found the oxygen burning his lungs like fire. For several long seconds he knelt there struggling, while millions watched across the galaxy. Then pure rage drove him to his feet. He had trained for this. He would not show weakness before the prey animal. He forced himself upright and faced Kira across 30 meters of open space. The arena master's voice echoed through speakers. "Combatants, are you ready?" Riktar raised his forearms and extended his claws. Kira simply nodded. "Begin." Riktar charged forward with all the speed his species was famous for. But in double gravity and burning oxygen, his movements were sluggish. He crossed the distance in 3 seconds. Instead of one, Kira waited until he was committed to his attack, then moved. She didn't try to block or parry. She simply wasn't there when his claws arrived. She had spent her entire life in 1G, and her body knew instinctively how to move in it. Vectors strike missed by centimeters, and his momentum carried him forward. Kira's foot swept his legs out from under him, and he crashed face first into the arena floor. He tried to roll and get up, but she was already moving. Her knee came down on his primary arm joint, and there was a sound like breaking ceramic. Rector screamed. He lashed out with his other arms, but the gravity made him slow. Kira avoided the strikes and methodically disabled each limb. She didn't use flashy techniques or unnecessary force. She simply applied pressure to joints until they broke. It was brutal and efficient, and completely clinical. Within 2 minutes, Riktar lay on the floor, unable to move and gasping for air that burned his lungs. Kira stood over him, breathing normally. "Do you yield?" she asked. Riktar's eyes showed pure hatred, but also fear. He had never felt this helpless in his life. "I yield," he choked out. Kira stepped back and raised her hand to signal the match was over. Arena Master declared her the victor. Medical teams rushed in to treat Riktar and get him to a standard atmosphere environment. The viewing gallery erupted in noise as species argued and discussed what they had just witnessed. The Zethkal clan elders sat in stunned silence. They had expected a fight. What they had seen was an execution that Kira had chosen to stop before the final blow. Ambassador Okonkwo watched with a carefully neutral expression, but inside she felt a fierce pride. This young woman had just redefined how the galaxy would view humanity. Professor Meisho turned to her colleagues and said quietly, "Now do you understand what a Class 12 Deathworld produces?" That wasn't even her at full capability. She's been living in a reduced environment for months. Imagine what a human could do who had trained their whole life for combat. The implications rippled through the observers like a shock wave. In the aftermath of the duel, the Concordance Security Council held emergency sessions to discuss the status of Earth and its citizens. They reviewed combat footage from the assassination attempt and the duel. They consulted with xenobiologists and military strategists, and they came to a unanimous conclusion: humanity could not be treated as a minor species anymore. Earth's classification was upgraded to Tier 2 Concordance status, which granted Full voting rights and representation. New protocols were established for students from Deathworld species, including proper environmental accommodations and protection from harassment. The Academy underwent massive reforms. Dean Sorthax personally oversaw the installation of variable gravity and atmospheric systems that could accommodate everything from low-G methane breathers to high-G oxygen metabolizers. Mandatory classes on cultural sensitivity and Deathworld species biology were added to the curriculum, and every student was required to learn about human history with special emphasis on persistence hunting and the fact that humans had literally evolved to throw rocks with deadly accuracy. For many students, the history lessons were more terrifying than any horror entertainment. They learned about humans chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, about humans surviving in every environment from frozen tundra to burning desert, about humans looking at the most dangerous predators on their world and deciding to domesticate them as pets. One student asked Professor Mayshow, "If humans are this dangerous, why aren't they conquering the galaxy?" The professor displayed an image of children playing in a park on Earth. "Because they don't need to," she said. "They already survived the hardest challenge in the universe, which is their own homeworld. Now they just want to learn and grow and be part of something bigger. Unless you threaten them, and then you discover what millions of years of evolution created." Kira returned to her studies with a completely different experience of academy life. Her quarters were comfortable for the first time. Her coursework became easier now that her brain had the oxygen it needed, and other students approached her not with fear, but with genuine curiosity and respect she made real friends, including Mayara, whose fur now showed warm purple tones when they talked. She joined study groups and participated in cultural exchange programs. She even started a wilderness survival club that attracted students who wanted to learn about Deathworld adaptation techniques. When she graduated 2 years later, it was at the top of her xenobiology class. Her thesis on comparative survival strategies across environmental extremes became required reading for anyone studying evolutionary biology. The Concordance offered her a position as a consultant on Deathworld species integration, but Kira had other plans. She returned to Earth and joined the diplomatic corps. She wanted to help prepare other humans for life among the stars and ensure they would never face what she had faced on her last day at the Academy. She stood in the main plaza where a new monument had been installed. It was a simple plaque listing all the Concordance member worlds with their classifications. Earth's entry read, Terra, Class 12 Deathworld. Handle with respect. A new student approached her nervously. He was human and looked overwhelmed by everything around him. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Kira-chan?" "I am," she replied. "I just arrived and everyone keeps staring at me, and I don't know what to do." Kira smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry," she said. "They're learning, and if anyone gives you trouble, remember something important." "What's that?" "You're from Earth," Kira said. "That means something now, and it always will. Walk like you belong here, because you do."